Hello everyone, in this lecture we will be studying about system calls. So, we will be seeing what are system calls and what are they used for. Okay, alright, let us start. So, it says here that system calls provide an interface to the services made available by an operating system. So, we know that there are certain services provided by the operating system to the programs and the user of the programs. So, the operating system provides certain services, various services to the programs and the user of the programs. So, system calls, what they do is they provide an interface to those services made available by the operating system. So, before understanding system calls in more details way, we have to understand that there are two important points we need to know that. So, two modes of operation in which programs can run, programs can execute, which is the user mode and the kernel mode. So, we will be understand what are user mode and the what are kernel modes. So, let us see, this is the diagram. You can see the diagram and these are the two modes of operations, user mode and kernel mode, in which a program can execute. So, if a program is executing in user mode, then that program does not have direct access to the memory, to the hardware, to all input output device and such resources, if a program is executing in user mode. If your program is executing in kernel mode, then that program has direct access to the memory, to IO devices and such hardwares and such resources. So, we know that programs is executing in user mode has not direct access to such resources, and if a program is executing in kernel mode, then that program has direct access to such resources. So, we can say that kernel mode is a privileged mode, because the programs all are executing in kernel mode has direct access to such resources. So, we can say kernel mode is a privileged mode, but the problem is that if a program is executing in kernel mode, then during its execution, if any error encountered, if it encountered an error and if the program happens to crash, then the entire system will be crash if the program is executing in only kernel mode. So, if a program is executing in user mode, then if that program happens to crash or comes to a halt, then the entire system will be crash or the entire system comes to the halt. So, the programs executing in user mode, and if any error encountered in that programs or any programs comes to a halt, if a program happens to crash, then the entire system will be crash or the entire system come to a halt. So, we can say the user mode is the safest mode, but the kernel mode is the privileged mode. Okay? So, we see that the user mode is the mode safe. For that purpose, most of the programs in your system, they are executes in user mode for execution, as the user mode is the safest mode. So, as most of the programs they execute in the mostly in user mode, so they need access to such resources. They need access, sometimes they need access to some of the resources. So, we know that the program executing in user mode, they does not have direct access to the hardware, memory or such resources, but in user mode the program need access to such resources. So, what happens for that instance, in user mode the program makes a call to the operating system, that telling that I need such resources, I need some memory or I need some hardware. So, for that instance, at that moment the program executing running in user mode switching from user mode to kernel mode for accessing such resources. As most of the resources they can access directly in the kernel mode. So, in user mode, if a program needs some resources, they at that moment the programs switching to the user mode to kernel mode. The switching is happening during that time. If a program is switching from user mode to kernel mode, that is called context switching, and even if the program is switched back to the user mode from the kernel mode, that is also called the context switching. So, what is context switching? If a program is running in one mode, suppose user mode, and user mode is switching to kernel mode for in order to accessing some resources, that is called context switching. And the call and the program that makes a call I was saying about, that is called your system calls. The user for in order to access some resources hardware, the user mode that makes a call for in order to accessing some resources hardware or IO devices memory, that is called system calls. So, system calls is a programmatic way, this is the programs made by the programs for accessing such resources. System call is the programmatic way in which a computer program requests a service from the kernel of the operating system that I told about. And next is what? These calls are generally available as routine written in C and C++. So, next is what? Types of system calls. So, there are many types of system calls available in operating system. Many system, thousands of system calls are running to perform a simple task. Okay. So, system calls can be grouped roughly into 5 categories. So, we will be seeing how the system calls are categorized into 5 categories and what are the differences between them and what are the 5 categories of system calls and how they works. So, first is what? Process control, second is your file manipulation, third is device manipulation, fourth one is information maintenance, and fifth one is communications. These are 5 categories of system calls made available in your systems. So, there are thousands of system calls running in your system to perform a simple task. For example, if you copy a file from a existing file, if you copy a file from another file, then there are many system calls running in your system to simply copy a file from another file. So, to perform a simple task, there are thousands of system calls can running in 1 second. So, all the system calls are performing in your system. These are categorized into these 5 categories and we will be seeing details. So, first is what? Process control. So, the system calls that are used for controlling your process. So, there are many processes, we know that there are many processes are executing running in our system, and if a process is created in our system and it has to be run and it has to be executed and it needs some system calls. So, there is a certain system calls which used for controlling that process. So, first is what? End and abort. These are the system calls fall under the process control. Okay. So, end and abort system call, load and execute, create process, terminate process, get process attributes, set process attributes, wait event and signal event, allocate and free memory. So, all the processes that running in your system, they terminate, they halt normally or abnormally. So, normally what I mean is, if a process completes its execution, then it terminates manually. This is what I say normally. What is abnormally? If a program is executing in your system, during its execution, if any error encountered, if it encountered an error, then suddenly it comes to a halt, it terminates abnormally. So this is how a process is executing, is terminating normally and abnormally. So if a process is terminating normally, then the system call is used, that is called end system call. That is end system call, in which a program is terminate normally, but the abort system call when the program is terminate abnormally. So load means a program to loading a program into main memory and execute a program, that is used execute system calls. So we can use load system calls and execute system calls. So next is creating process. To create a process, there are many types of process that is creating, and that parent process creating its child process. Okay, many type of processes are there, I will be discuss details. Okay, so to creating process, we use the create process system calls, and we use terminate process system calls. And to getting process attributes, to setting process attributes, we used get process attributes and set process attributes. Next is wait event. Wait event means a process, suppose a process is going to be execute, a process is going to be running, and it have to wait. It have to wait for some time and for some event. Okay, so for that moment a wait event system call is created. Okay, and signal event. Next is allocate and free memory. So when a process is running, it must access directly or indirectly some memory, some resources. So if some resources have to allocated in that process, maybe that process need access to that memory or any IO devices, it requires IO devices, it requires hardware, such resources, so that in that particular moment it have to allocate that memory. Okay, so for that allocating that process into such resources, there is a system calls called allocate system call, and after its execution complete, then it have to deallocate that resources. So for that free memory system calls is there, okay, to deallocating that process. So these 5 types of system calls comes under the process control system calls. Okay, so next is what? Next is file manipulation. So what is file manipulation? Some system calls that are used to manipulate or maintain of files. Okay, to maintain or manipulating the files, there are some certain system calls, these are used in your system. So what are they? Sometimes you may have to create files, sometimes you may have to delete files. Okay, sometimes you may have to search for a given files. So these all are maintained by operating system of system calls. So some system calls that are used for manipulating or maintaining to file, these are. So first system calls is create file, to creating a file, to deleting a file, and then if you open a file, there is a system calls that is running, that is open, and if you terminate your process, if a file is terminate, if a file is closed, then the close system calls is executing. Next is if to reading file, to write a file, and reposition a file. There is 3 system calls used for reading, writing, and repositioning. Okay. So next is to getting file attributes and setting file attributes. There is 2 system calls used in get file attributes and set file attributes. As I said before, if you simply copy a file from another file, there are many thousands of system calls running in your system. So you have to, if you copy a file, you have to create file, you have to naming a file, you have to read a file, you have to write a file. So for simply copy a file, for copying a file. So these are the system calls used for file manipulation. So create file, delete, open, close, read, write, reposition, get file attributes, set file attributes, these are the comes under the file manipulation. Next is device manipulation. So we know that the processes, there are many processes running in our system, and they, for instance, when they are executing in our system, they need access to certain resources. So the resources may be devices. So to maintaining those devices that are allocating such process, we have to make a system calls to control a device. So what are those? So let's see. First system call is request device. So when a process need access to such devices, it have to call to that devices. That means request that devices to allocate that particular devices. So it makes a call, and that system calls is called request. Next is read, write and reposition, that is same as above. And next is to getting device and to setting device attributes. We need get device attributes and set device attributes. Next is logically attach or detach device. The system calls used for logically attaching or detaching the devices. So what do you mean by logically attached device? So the logically attached is little bit different from physically attached device. So what do you mean by physically attached device? Let's say you have a pen drive or flash drive, and when you plug it into your system manually, so this is called physically attached device. So what do you mean by logically attached device? Logically means your in your system there is an operating system who needs to understand that a device has been attached and it is ready for use. Your operating system needs to understand that. That is called logically attached device. So that is a little bit difference from logically and physically. So what is detached device? Logically detached means a device that is plugged into your system, and when you right click on that pen drive icons, you may choose eject or safely remove that device. That means it is logically detached. Still it physically attached to your device, but it logically detached. So logically attached means the operating system needs to understand that that a device has been attached into my system and it is ready for use. But detached means it is logically detached. That is you may right click on your icon and you may choose eject option. That means it logically already manually detached, but it's still attached to your system, plug into your system. So that is logically attaching or detaching devices. So next system calls is information maintenance. So what is information maintenance? There are many system calls that are used for maintaining or manipulating the information about your system. There are many information regarding your system that should be maintained. Okay, these are some system calls which are used to maintain your information. What are they? So first is get time or date, set time or date. So the information that are used in your system, it should be getting or setting the time and date. So for that the get time or date system call and set time or date system calls are used. Next, same as above, get system data and set system data. Okay, to getting the system data and to setting the system data and their time and date. Okay, and next is get process, file or device attributes. To getting process, files or device attributes, we need to use some system calls that fall under the information maintenance, that is get process, file or device attributes. Next is set process, to setting a process, file or device attributes. So, the getting the process and to setting the process, files or device attributes, these are the system calls used in your operating system. Next is communications. So, communications is very important things that should be happen into many processes. So, there are many processes executing in your system and they should communicate to each other for synchronization. They have to communicate to each other for sending their status, for sending their executing status or any works, for any works. So, communication need take place into many processes. So, there are certain system calls that are used for communications among various processes. There are many types of communications used in your operating system that handled by the operating system in your system, that is shared memory system or message passing system. I will tell you in details in the next lecture. So, in this lecture we will be seeing what are the system calls that used for maintaining the communications among process. If many processes communicate to each other, there must be a communication link between them as they communicate directly or indirectly. So, if a process communicate each other directly or whether indirectly, there must be a communication link between them. So, for create or delete communications connection, there is a system calls create, that is create system calls, and delete communications connection, to delete system calls. And for sending and receiving messages, there is a system call used, send system call and receive system call. Okay. Next is transport status informations. That means a process needs to send its context, sends its status to the other processes. So, for that transport status information, there is a system calls used for transferring the status of the process. And next is attaching or detaching remote devices. So, these are system calls falls under the communications. So, in this lecture we saw the main 5 categories of system calls that are used in your system, that is process control, file manipulations, device manipulations and information maintenance and communications. In the next video we will be studying about system programs. So, see you in the next one. Thank you.